Book 3, Chapter 7, Scars of the Soul. The silence that followed them out of Thunder Tree was a shroud, heavier than any morning mist. Venomfang was gone, a green speck vanishing into a sky the color of slate, but the ghost of his presence remained, coiled around the skeletal trees and clinging to the party like the cloying scent of poison. Karma Ral walked at the front, his back rigid, eyes fixed on the horizon. Since their calamitous encounter with the green dragon, he had spoken less than a dozen words. Now, as they departed the ruins, he felt a crack in his own foundations. He had trusted a woman. He had followed her, a moth drawn to a flame, and the flame had nearly consumed his entire company. He could not reconcile the chaotic, emotional world of that woman with the orderly, masculine world he understood. The contradiction was a splinter in his mind, and prayer was the only tool he had to dig it out.
"Balin,"
he said, his voice a low rumble meant for all to hear.
"I must retreat into silence,"
he declared.
"Hor demands a reckoning, but first I must reckon with myself."
The dwarf grunted, adjusting the magical axe strapped to his back.
"Do not expect words from me. Only through silence can I hear my God's voice clearly."
Without waiting for acknowledgement, he turned away. His mind churned with uncomfortable questions. Had he been wrong to trust a woman's intuition? Had Zyra's vision been a manipulation by dark forces, or merely the hysteria he'd always attributed to the weaker sex? And why, despite the disaster that followed, did some small voice inside him insist he would make the same choice again? He felt a crack in his own foundations, but prayer would silence these doubts. Prayer would restore certainty. Balin stopped short, his boots grinding against the gravel. He reached out and caught Karma by the sleeve.
"Paladin,"
he said, voice low but firm.
"My grandmother used to say, when axe fails, blame not the weapon, but the anvil that forged the flaw."
Karma paused, the words settling into his mind like an echo he hadn't expected to hear. Behind him, Elara Morningvale guided Zira with gentle hands upon her shoulders. The elf's face still bore the dark veining of dragon venom, stark against his pallid skin. Yet there was an almost beatific serenity in his expression as he leaned close to Zira's ear.
"You'll be with us soon. No fear,"
he whispered, his voice soft and melodious.
"Everything's going to be just fine."
Zira heard nothing. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, saw only the pyre, the bound elven girl, and the final soul-shattering scream that was branded on her consciousness. She was the Judas goat, driven by foolish pride. She had led them all into grave danger, and an elven girl was slaughtered because of her blindness. Only Doreen and Balin seemed untouched by the gloom. Doreen, ever the pragmatist, twirled a silver goblet she'd snatched from the dragon's hoard. Its ornate beauty was a defiant spark against the gray landscape.
"Can you believe the craftsmanship?"
she chattered, holding it up for Balin's inspection.
"Bet this'll fetch a pretty penny in Neverwinter. Or maybe I'll keep it. A girl deserves nice things, right?"
Balin grunted.
"Oh, yes. Nothing says luxury like a fine coating of dragon spit."
Doreen twirled the goblet between her fingers and shrugged.
"Think that adds to the value or decreases it?"
Balin offered a non-committal grunt, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The difference between the dwarf's good and bad moods was subtle as the variation between types of granite, but Doreen had learned to read the minute shifts in his stony countenance. Right now he was content. They'd survived a dragon encounter and secured treasure. For a dwarf, this constituted a good day. When they finally reached the wagon where they'd left Rolfgar, they found the man huddled beneath it, his eyes wide with terror.
Did you see it?"
He stammered, peering out at them from his makeshift shelter.
"It was a dragon, a real dragon, flew right over the clearing."
Balin crouched down, peering under the wagon with a glint of amusement in his eyes.
Not a bad den you've got there. If you got any beer there, I'll come to hide with you.
Rolfgar didn't seem to appreciate the humor, his hands trembling as he clutched his knees to his chest. Doreen stepped forward, unable to contain herself.
Oh, we did more than see it, my friend. We faced it.
She launched into an embellished account of their encounter, casting herself as the clever heroine who'd outwitted the great beast with wit and daring.
There I was staring into those enormous venomous eyes, and I thought to myself, Doreen, old girl, you've got one chance.
While Doreen regaled the terrified wagon driver with her heavily revised version of events, Balin helped Elara settle Zira into the wagon. The sorceress sat limply, her normally meticulous appearance now a shambles, hair tangled with debris, once fine clothing torn and stained with ash and blood. After allowing Doreen's tail to wind down, Balin cleared his throat.
Need to move on, dragon or no dragon.
Doreen nodded, her storytelling bravado fading slightly as she glanced around the forest edge.
So how do we cross the river to the north? The notes mentioned Ashen Hill. That sounds like our next stop if we want to find Cragmaw Castle and rescue Gundren.
Balin pointed upstream.
Logging camp about a day's journey that way. Same place those log drivers came from. They'll have rafts.
They set out toward the logging camp, the wagon creaking beneath them. During a short rest, Balin examined the axe they'd recovered from the dragon's hoard. The weapon felt strange in his hands. Not uncomfortable, but somehow alert. The name Hugh was engraved in dwarven runes along its haft.
Weapon made for cutting trees,
he muttered, running a calloused thumb over the runes.
I can feel it. It doesn't like the forest. And the forest doesn't like it either.
He glanced up at the towering trees surrounding them, their branches swaying slightly in a wind that seemed to carry whispers. For the first time since they'd left Thundertree, Balin looked genuinely uneasy. As the hours passed, Karma remained true to his word, walking in complete silence, his lips moving occasionally in soundless prayer. When asked questions, he simply turned away, focusing his gaze as if seeing something beyond mortal sight. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a small rise and spotted the logging camp ahead. The expected sounds of industry, axes striking wood, men calling to each other, the creak of loaded wagons, all were conspicuously absent. Doreen stood in the wagon, narrowing her eyes.
Something's wrong. It's completely deserted.
The camp consisted of a single wooden building surrounded by several large canvas tents, their fabric fluttering softly in the breeze. No smoke rose from the chimney, and no figures moved between the structures.
Should check it out,
Balin said, pulling the wagon to a halt at a safe distance. Elara nodded, carefully extracting himself from where he'd been sitting beside Zira. He took the doll's head, Lily, from inside his jerkin and, with a solemnity that bordered on ritual, placed it in Zira's hands.
The spirit of Morthal will protect you,
he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unsettling tenderness.
I'll return for you, Eli. I promise.
Doreen stepped up beside Elara, rapier already in hand.
Let's go then. Quick in and out. I don't like the feel of this place.
They had made it halfway to the main building when Doreen suddenly stopped, slapping her forehead.
Wait, Elara, we don't have mage armor. Zyra usually casts it on us.
Elara turned, his eyes briefly focusing on reality before sliding back into whatever private world he inhabited.
But the spirit of Morthal will protect us,
he replied with absolute conviction. Doreen sighed.
Right, of course. How could I forget about the ghost of our dead cleric?
She shook her head.
I'll go back and get Zyra to cast it. You wait here.
But Ilara had already continued toward the building, slipping inside before Doreen could stop him. Inside, Ilara scanned the dim interior. The room contained several rough-hewn tables and benches, a cold hearth, and a few shuttered windows that admitted thin blades of late-afternoon light. A single closed door likely led to a side room. Just as Doreen returned with Balin and Zira, who moved with the mechanical compliance of a sleepwalker, the floor beneath Ilara's feet shifted, and the wooden planks exploded upward, and a monstrous form erupted into the room. It was a cockroach the size of a horse, its chitinous body gleaming wetly in the dim light, antennae quivering as it oriented on Ilara. The creature's mandibles clacked together with a sound like knives being sharpened. Balin burst through the doorway, axe already swinging.
"Onkig!"
He roared. Outside, Zyra and Doreen had barely processed what was happening inside when the ground behind them heaved. With 3 simultaneous explosions of dirt and stone, more of the monstrous insects erupted from the earth. Their segmented bodies dripped with slime, and their compound eyes reflected the fading sunlight in nauseating kaleidoscopes. Instinct broke through Zira's fugue state. Her hands swept upward, orbs of fire materializing in her palms. She launched them at the nearest ankhegs, one striking true and igniting its carapace with a satisfying hiss. Without waiting to see the effect, she darted through the doorway into the building, seeking the relative safety of walls. Inside, she found herself face to face with the ankheg that Ilara and Balin were trying to corner. The creature reared back, mandibles spread wide, revealing a gullet that glistened with viscous fluid. Behind her, one of the ankhegs surged forward. Its mandibles clacked once, twice, and then it spewed a powerful stream of acid. The caustic liquid splashed across Doreen, then through the doorway, catching Zira and Balin in its burning spray. Zyra's scream pierced the air as the acid ate through her clothing and seared her skin. Doreen, equally drenched, cursed violently and spun around. Realizing she wouldn't fit through the doorway with the others blocking it, she made a split-second decision.
You bastards!
She shrieked, seeing the doorway blocked,
You left me here to die.
then turned and sprinted behind the building, seeking cover. Inside, Zira fought through the burning pain to launch another set of fire orbs, but the dimness and chaos made aiming difficult. Her attacks went wide, scorching the wooden walls. She instinctively edged closer to Ilara, seeking protection as Balin and the elf warrior managed to push their ankheg into a corner. The momentary relief vanished as the floorboards behind her shattered, and another roach surged up from the dirt below. Its powerful mandibles closed around her waist, lifting her from her feet. Acid, hot and vile, sprayed over her, and she screamed again as it shook her like a dog with a rat. The world dissolved into a vortex of pain, and then into blackness as she hung limp in its jaws.
"Eli!"
Ilara's roar was one of pure, primal fury. He dropped one of his swords, grabbing at Zyra's unconscious form with a free hand, while hacking at the creature with the other.
You can't have her!
The ankheg, perhaps startled by the ferocity of his attack, tossed Zira's unconscious form aside. She hit the corner of the room with a thud, a broken doll discarded by a careless child. Outside, Doreen's hiding place proved short-lived. The ground before her bulged and split, another ankheg rising from the earth with terrible inevitability. Its antennae quivered, orienting on her scent. Doreen swung her rapier in a panicked arc, but the blade skittered harmlessly off the creature's armored carapace. Halia's words echoed in her mind.
Take care of yourself, Doreen. No one else will.
She turned and ran again, this time toward the river dock, praying the creatures wouldn't follow her into the water. Inside the building, the battle raged. Ilara, driven by desperate fury, managed to drive his blade deep between the carapaces. The creature shuddered, greenish ichor spurting from the wound, then collapsed. Ilara immediately dropped to his knees beside Zira, fumbling for a healing potion. Just as the vial touched her acid-burned lips, the floor beside them exploded yet again. Another Ankeg emerged, its mandibles finding Zira's prone form with unerring accuracy. It clamped down on her already mangled body, and Ilara heard the sickening crack of bone. Blood mixed with venomous acid splashed over him as Zira's body jerked once in the creature's grip, a reflexive spasm of pain. Something snapped in Ilara. With a howl that contained no trace of sanity, he drove both swords into the Ankeg's head with such force that the points emerged from the other side. The creature released Zira, staggering backward, then slumped to the ground, twitching. At the dock, Doreen had waited long enough to realize no more Ankegs were pursuing her. The sounds of combat from the building had diminished. Cautiously, rapier extended before her, she crept back toward the structure, every sense alert for the telltale shifting of earth that would herald another attack. When she reached the doorway, the battle was in its final throes. She nocked an arrow and sent it flying into the last remaining Ankeg, just as Balin's sword cleaved into its head. The creature collapsed with a wet, gurgling sound, its legs curling inward. Ilara rushed to Zira and gathered her limp form in his arms, cradling her like a child. Blood soaked through his armor where her wounds pressed against him. Her right arm hung at an unnatural angle, the flesh blackened and in places simply gone, melted away by the acid.
Eli,
He whispered, rocking gently.
Eli, please.
Doreen looked at Zira's unconscious form that lay twisted in Ilara's arms. Doreen's stomach lurched at the sight of Zira's right arm. The limb was a ruin, blackened in places, raw flesh exposed in others. Bone gleamed whitely where the acid had eaten through muscle.
Gods.
Doreen whispered. The memory of her anger curdled in her stomach. She pulled a healing potion from her belt and carefully tipped it between Zira's pale lips. The magic worked its slow miracle. Color returned to Zira's cheeks and her eyes fluttered open. She looked down at her arm. The healing potion had closed the wounds, but it could not erase the damage. A hideous, puckered scar, slick and black, now covered her forearm from wrist to elbow.
It's fitting.
She whispered, her voice a broken thing.
A mark. A reminder.
What are you talking about?
Doreen asked, helping her sit up. Zira stared at the ruined limb.
The girl. The elven girl I couldn't save.
She raised the arm slightly, wincing. To Zira, it was not just a scar. It was a brand, a reminder of her failure, a punishment for her foolish pride. She deserved this. Tears began to well in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She wept for the pain, for her helplessness, but most of all for the girl she had let die. Doreen, uncomfortable with such naked emotion, patted her awkwardly on her uninjured shoulder.
Come on, let's get back to the wagon. These things might have friends.
Ilara insisted on checking the side room before they left. He kicked open the door, swords ready, only to find a man curled beneath a table, sobbing quietly. The man looked up with red-rimmed eyes, his fine clothes incongruously neat amid the devastation.
"Took you long enough?"
he said, his voice cracking with fear and indignation. Back at the wagon, the man straightened his fine clothes and introduced himself with an air of unearned authority.
"I am Tibor Wester, master of this logging operation,"
he announced, eyeing the bloodied party with distaste rather than gratitude.
"Took you people long enough? I've been trapped in there for days."
Doreen's jaw dropped slightly.
We just saved your life.
"And you expect praise for fumbling through a simple extermination job? Those monsters burst out 3 days ago. The lumberjacks either ran or died. What kept you?"
We nearly died saving you.
Doreen said, her voice dangerously soft. Though she valued gold above most things, something about this man's entitled dismissal of their efforts made her blood boil. Tibor waved dismissively.
Workers are replaceable. The contracts and profits, however. Do you have any idea what this disaster costs me? My brother will never let me hear the end of this failure.
Doreen leaned forward, a cold smile forming.
You know what's not replaceable? Your throat if you keep talking to me like I'm your servant.
Balin stepped between them, his expression grim.
We need to move,
The dwarf said firmly.
more onkegs could surface.
Tibor opened his mouth to protest, but something in Balin's stony gaze made him reconsider. With a huff, he climbed into the wagon, still muttering about his losses while avoiding Doreen's glare. As they trudged a half-mile from the abandoned logging camp, the wagon wheels cutting deep ruts in the soft forest loam, Doreen's trained eye caught movement at the tree line. She stiffened, scanning the shadowed undergrowth until she spotted it, a massive wild boar standing motionless at the forest's edge, watching them with an unnerving stillness.
Look there.
Doreen said, pointing toward the creature.
That boar. See how it's just watching us?
Balin pulled the wagon to a halt while Alara's hand moved to his sword. Both men squinted in the direction she indicated.
Well,
Balin grunted. Doreen turned back to point more precisely, but the spot stood empty. The boar had vanished without a sound.
It was right there.
She insisted.
Just a moment ago.
Tibor let out a derisive snort from his perch in the wagon.
The ghost boar?
He said, his tone carrying a hint of superstitious unease beneath the mockery.
My workers have been seeing it for months, always watching the camp, always disappearing when someone tries to show it to others.
He adjusted his fine collar.
Bad for morale. I told them it was just their imagination.
Ghost or not, I saw something.
Doreen said firmly.
Alara, let's check for tracks.
The elf nodded, his eyes briefly focused as they slipped into the forest undergrowth. Near where the boar had stood, they discovered fresh hoofprints pressed deep into the loamy soil, unmistakably those of a large boar. They followed the trail for 30 paces before the tracks simply vanished, where the forest floor gave way to bare stone. Doreen crouched, examining the last print.
It's as if it knew exactly where to step to lose pursuers.
It could be just an animal.
Alara murmured, then paused, a flicker of clarity crossing his face.
Or something else.
You think it could be the druid?
Doreen asked, straightening up.
The one we're looking for, Redoth? Druids can take animal forms, can't they?
Wild shape.
Ilara confirmed, the word precise despite his distant gaze. Doreen cupped her hands around her mouth and called for Redoth. She yelled that they were seeking help. Gundren, Rockseeker, was captured and Phandalin in danger. Her calls echoed through the silent forest, answered only by the rustling of leaves and distant birdsong. After waiting several moments, they exchanged glances and made their way back to the wagon.
If that was our druid.
Doreen reported as she climbed aboard.
He's not ready to talk. But something was definitely watching us.
ghosts or druids matters not,
Balin said gruffly, flicking the reins.
Need proper camp before dark.
The wagon lurched forward, leaving behind the unseen observer, who melted back into the ancient shadows of the forest. As the party established their camp for the evening, Tibor circled the site with hands clasped behind his back, examining their arrangements with obvious disdain.
No, this won't do at all,
he declared, watching Rolfgar stir a pot of stew over the campfire.
Is that dried meat in this forest teeming with game? And those mushrooms? My palate is rather refined, you understand.
Rolfgar, still shaken from the Ankeg attack, merely nodded and continued cooking. His hands trembled slightly as he added salt to the pot. Then Tibor saw Doreen's tent in the wagon, and a smile appeared on his face.
I'll take that,
he announced, pointing imperiously at Doreen's tent.
It appears to be the only proper tent, and as a Wester, I require appropriate accommodations.
Doreen's hand moved to her dagger, fingers wrapping around the hilt with deadly intent. Her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits.
touch my tent,
she said in a voice like steel on stone.
and you'll wake up with one less hand than you went to sleep with.
How dare you?
Tibor spluttered, though he took a quick step backward.
Do you have any idea who I am?
Doreen cut in, rising to her feet with fluid grace that made Tibor flinch again.
I don't care if you're the king of Neverwinter. That's my tent.
Suddenly, Bylin stepped between them, producing a weathered skin from the wagon.
Special reserve,
He grunted, offering it to Tibor.
dwarven fire spirit, smoother than elf wine, stronger than orc rage.
Tibor's indignation wavered, his eyes fixing on the skin with naked interest.
Well, I suppose one must make certain allowances when traveling with
He gestured vaguely.
common folk.
3 generous drafts later, Tibor's complaints about Rolfgar's peasant stew had devolved into slurred reminiscences about business ventures in Neverwinter. Shortly thereafter, he slumped beneath the wagon, snoring loudly, a thin line of drool glistening on his chin.
Strong stuff.
Balin commented with the barest hint of a smile, taking a long swig. Doreen's murderous glare softened slightly.
I forgive you for wasting good liquor on that waste of space,
She said.
but only because watching him drool on himself makes up for it.
Across the camp, Karma knelt in prayer, his lips moving silently. Though his eyes were closed, his awareness extended outward, taking in the wounded party around him. In Zira's quiet tears, in Ilara's madness, in Doreen's brittle laughter, he sensed a fracturing. The group was splintering, each member retreating into their private pain.
Is this your test, Lord Hoare?
He asked silently.
Am I failing to understand what you would have me see?
Late in that night, during Ilara's wolf watch, long before the morning twilight, the campfire burned low. Zira emerged from the tent to sit staring into the flames, cradling her injured arm. The healing potions had saved the limb and closed the worst of the wounds, but it could not erase the sprawling, discolored scars that now marked her from wrist to elbow. The silence of the camp was a thick blanket, heavier than the pine-scented air of the wilderness. It had been a day since the horror at Thunder Tree Tower. A day since the elven girl's final scream had clawed its way into Zira's mind, where it now played on a ceaseless, torturous loop. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the girl's face, not as a vision, but as a memory of a sacrifice she had personally delivered to the altar of the Green Dragon. She had been so sure, so utterly convinced that she understood the vision. She was a fool, a weak-minded, emotional fool who had mistaken a phantom for a prophecy. Karma's judgment had been a silent, palpable force across the camp. Doreen's attempts at comfort felt like ash in her mouth. She needed to say the words aloud, to give voice to the poison corrupting her from within, or she would shatter. Her gaze fell upon Ilara. He sat on the other side of the fire, also staring into the flames. Zira saw a man as broken as she felt. Perhaps he, of all people, would understand. She rose, her movements stiff, her elegant dress stained with mud and blood, and sat next to him.
Ilara.
Her voice was a raw whisper. His eyes, when they met hers, were distant, but they held a flicker of something she mistook for recognition. The dam broke. Tears she had held back fell freely, hot and fast, down her cheeks.
I have to tell you.
She choked out, sinking to her knees beside him.
The tower, the girl, it was my fault, all of it.
She didn't wait for a response. The words tumbled out, a torrent of self-loathing and despair.
The dreams, I thought I understood them. I thought I was saving her. I led us all into it. I led you to that dragon. I killed that girl as surely as if I'd held the knife myself.
She buried her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs.
I almost got you killed. I'm so sorry.
Ilara's reaction was not what she expected. There was no anger, no accusation. He simply moved closer, his movements gentle, and began to stroke her hair. His touch was light, almost reverent, but it sent a strange chill through her.
Shh, Eli. It's all right.
He murmured, his voice a low, soothing hum that was utterly disconnected from the horror she had just confessed.
It's not your fault. None of it. This place, it's a nightmare.
He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her shoulders.
We'll leave. We'll take a ship from Neverwinter and sail away. Just you and me. No more cultists, no more monsters, no more pain.
His words were a balm, but they were the wrong medicine for her wound. Flee? Abandon everything?
No.
She whispered, pulling back to look at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with a desperate resolve.
We can't. What if there are others? Other prisoners the cultists took. We can't just leave them.
She searched his face for understanding, for a sign that he grasped the duty that now weighed on her.
You don't understand,
She pleaded.
That girl. When I saw her in my visions, when I heard her scream, it felt like we were sisters in fate.
The word hung in the air between them. Sister. The change in Ilara was instantaneous and terrifying. The vacant warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a darting, frantic terror. He pulled his hands away from her as if she had burned him. His breath hitched.
No.
He breathed, scrambling back. His hand shot to a grimy pouch at his belt and pulled out a charred, blackened doll's head. He cradled it in his palms, his thumbs stroking its soot-stained cheeks.
Lily,
He whispered, his voice cracking. Zyra stared, frozen, as the quiet, brooding warrior began a frantic, one-sided conversation.
she knows.
He hissed at the doll.
She's starting to remember.
A new voice seemed to enter the space, though no one else spoke. It was a silken, insidious whisper that seemed to emanate from the doll itself, a voice woven from shadows and old grief.
Of course she is, my love. Time is running out.
What do I do?
Ilara begged.
You almost lost her again.
The doll's voice admonished, sharp and cruel.
A dragon! You let her walk into a dragon's maw. You let them hurt her.
A strangled wail escaped Ilara's throat. It was a sound of pure agony.
Do you see now?
Lily's voice softened, becoming dangerously persuasive.
This reckless path she is on will be her end. The memories are returning. Soon she will know what you are, what you did. You must save her soul before it is lost forever in that shell.
Ilara was shaking his head violently.
No, no.
It is the only way to be sure.
Lily's voice became a venomous caress.
For this second time, you will need to wear the amulet she found. Let me look into her soul while your blade grants her oblivion from that corrupt vessel. Free her.
I can't.
Ilara cried out, clutching the doll's head to his chest. He was rocking back and forth, his eyes screwed shut in panic.
I can't do it again. Never again.
Then there is only one other way.
The voice whispered.
A final, terrible alternative. If you are too weak to grant her peace, then we must make the vessel stronger, strong enough to survive her own foolishness. She needs another guardian, Ilara, another anchor. Give her another strong soul like Morthal's. Bind it to her. Only then can we keep our Eli safe, no matter how hard she tries to die.
The whisper dissolved into the night, and Ilara grew still. He lowered the doll, and his gaze found hers, pinning her in place. The frantic terror in his eyes was gone, replaced by a profound and cold stillness that offered no recognition. In his placid gaze, Zira felt a terrifying shift. The prison of her guilt was suddenly shadowed by the unyielding cage of the ruins of his sanity.
Kreisop trennen, lysgyntan, yn y ffilm yn gweithio sbryn o'r gorwydd